And now we have our DEI in Action panel. And Portia Conerly, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ronnie. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. You are now tuned into the DEI in Action panel, and we are all excited to be with you today to continue these very meaningful and important discussions around diversity, equity, and inclusion. My name is Portia Conerly. I am the Director of Sales for the Arlington Convention and Visitor Service in Arlington, Virginia, and I will be your moderator today. Two quick housekeeping notes. One, remember, if you are not speaking to someone on the panel, please remain on mute. Also, if you do have any questions or comments, we really want you to put them below in the chat throughout this session because Ronnie is monitoring it the entire time. So with that said, let's get started. I would like to introduce quickly our panel. We have Courtney Cacatian, who is the Executive Director of the Charlottesville Albemarle Convention and Visitor Bureau. Renee Areng, who is with Explore Brookhaven, Georgia. Karen Kuhl, who is the Executive Director of Cayuga County, and Melissa Cherry, who is the Chief Diversity Inclusion Officer at Miles Partnership. So what I want to do first is allow the panelists just to take a couple of minutes to talk about, the background themselves or whatever they want to talk about. And I would like to have Courtney kick that off, please. Thanks, Courtney.
Thank you, Portia. Good morning. I'm honored to be here and included today in this conversation. As Portia said, I'm the Executive Director of the Charlottesville Albemarle Convention and Visitors Bureau in Charlottesville, Virginia. And I have been in the DMO space for about 15 years. I started here in Charlottesville in August of 2019 and have had a lifelong commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. But my personal mission is that I am raising mixed race kids. And so that always keeps me focused and has given me some pretty incredible and often sad insight into a world that I didn't realize growing up. So being in Charlottesville, we have a pretty important conversation, and we've been unfortunately at the forefront of a lot of national news. And so when I took the job here, I realized that this was something that I was going to need to address head on. So we'll be talking more about that in a little bit.
Thank you, Courtney. And can we hear from Renee?
Hey, good morning, everybody. So Brookhaven, Georgia is my fourth destination to lead sales, marketing, or CEO type positions. I've probably worked with dozens over the years, either in a consulting manner or partnership. And the unique opportunity that we had here in Brookhaven was that no one knew anything about the community as a destination. And so we literally got to start from scratch in 2019, building our brand strategy, asking leadership, asking residents, doing surveys of travelers across the country. As being part of the Atlanta Metro, obviously a lot of people travel through here or to here. And so we had a great network of interest and perspective. And what we found through that whole process was that Brookhaven was perceived as a very diverse community, a very welcoming community. 25% of our residents speak Spanish natively. So that has been a concentration for us as well. We've not delved into the Native American indigenous population quite as much yet, but that is definitely on our radar. So a whole set of doors opened with this last 20 months, basically bringing DEI to everyone's forefront. We kept evaluating what we had created in our strategic plan and realized, interestingly, we were ahead of the game. And so we've just continued to build our knowledge base and our interest, going through the Certified Diversity Travel Professional Program, through Travel Unity, participating with Destinations International in the master class for equity, diversity, inclusion, and then even in helping the city lead some civic dinners through their social justice. Sorry, I was reading Ronnie's notes. Social Justice, Equity, and Race Commission. We helped create some civic dinners throughout the community for open dialogue. And there were, I know we were talking about the Facebook comments. We had some interesting planted opinions in those dialogues that were the antithesis of diversity and inclusion. It was a really interesting juggle. On a personal note, I grew up as a brown woman in the South, and people always want to know how to pigeonhole you into something that they don't know anything about. We had the luck to live in Europe when I was in high school, in Switzerland in particular, and there's no such thing over there. There's no such thing as defining you based on your skin color. And I remember having a conversation with my son, who is built like my husband, but has my coloring, when he was much younger, and just basically said, you know what, bud, they're going to ask you. You can tell them that your grandparents immigrated from Lebanon. You can tell them it's none of their business. I just want you to be prepared that you're going to be asked. So that's been a real open dialogue at home for us. And I'm happy to continue that in my workspace as well.
Thank you, Renee. Now let's hear from Karen.
Good morning, everyone. It is truly a pleasure and honor to be amongst this panel, and anything that I do with Travel Unity always brings so much purpose to my life, so I am glad to be here. I like to joke that I started in the tourism industry when I was 5 years old. My parents had a mountain resort in Nicaragua, and I used to just get so much joy out of seeing the pleasure that they brought people when they disconnected from their day-to-day life and were able to enjoy nature. I have since then pursued a heavy career in tourism, both nationally and internationally. And what I try to do wherever I go is identify the untold story. And the untold story often includes underrepresented communities in the areas that I work with. So that is what brought me to start working with elevating Harriet Tubman's story in Cayuga County as her chosen hometown. Few people know that that is where she chose to live when she spent the later 50 years of her life. And I'll get more into that as we get into the panel, but it is part of an untold story that is important to recognize. And it's one of the things that I truly love doing in tourism.
Thank you very much, Karen. And Melissa.
Thanks, Portia, and good morning, everyone. And thank you, Ronnie and Travel Unity, for this invitation this morning. I'm Melissa Cherry. I'm currently the Chief Diversity Inclusion Officer at Miles Partnership, and just only 2 months old there. But I've been in the industry for over 25 years, actually, starting in Los Angeles at the Convention and Visitors Bureau at the time, now the Tourism and Convention Board. But my career really began in the space of cultural tourism at the time when cultural tourism was only practiced by a few of us within the CVB world, and has since changed and essentially now part of what everyone uses to really differentiate their brands from one destination to the next. But as part of that work, and very similar to Karen, my time in cultural tourism began to focus on neighborhoods and the people and the stories and the community in those neighborhoods. And oftentimes, that was done through the expression, through arts and culture, but the lived experiences and the unique experiences that would happen in those spaces, I felt was important to champion in my career as marketers, to really leverage those stories to bring a special kind of experience when people would go from city to city and have a different experience. So that made my career actually be very interesting, in that after 9/11, I actually came for a second out of the industry, went back into the arts and cultures world, working at the Chicago History Museum, which ultimately led me back to the industry. As they say, we always come back. So I spent my time at TUS Chicago, which is the CVB there, being the first actual SVP of Cultural Tourism and eventually the Chief Marketing Officer there. To really continue to elevate the stories of neighborhood, looking at neighborhood tourism development. So not just the marketing and promotion, but having folks in the community understand essentially how to develop tourism product. And that's the part of this work that sometimes as practitioners we miss. And so that is really what I focused on at my time there. And then moving into my most recent role as Chief Operating Officer at Destinations International, I wore many hats, but one of the hats I'm very excited and proud to have been part of was leading the first strategic roadmap for an equity, diversity, inclusion plan on behalf of our industry and association. So thank you, Portia, and panelists. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you so much, Melissa. And you are right. We always end up coming back. It's amazing how it comes full circle. So let's get at it. Our first question for this panel, it's actually it's a two-part question. and this is for everyone on this panel, all 4 ladies. And it is, why is DEI important to your organization? And then why is DEI important to you? And I would like for Courtney to kick us off with that.
All right, thanks. I think I touched on this just briefly when I was introducing myself, but DEI work is, very personally, it's been something that I've been striving to work on for a long time. Portia and I were colleagues in Arlington, Virginia, and she has kind of watched my journey of educating myself and helped with some of that education, of opening my eyes to a better understanding, and that education can't stop. And the more I learn, the more I see work that needs to be done. And so that's I guess what personally motivates me. With our destination here in Charlottesville being tied with, associated with a hate rally, white supremacists, we have to address this, and we need to address it head on and make sure that we are doing right by our community and making real actual change, both internally with our organization, but also how we promote our organization and our destination throughout the community. So I took this position knowing that that was going to be a large part of my contribution to this work, and have been continuing along that journey. So.
Thank you, Courtney. Renee, what about you?
Okay. So yeah, again, we all kind of touched on that early on. We were jumping your gun a little bit there, Portia. But to Karen's point, I had the luxury of traveling when I was younger and living in multiple states in the US, living in Europe for a period of time. And it put the travel bug in me. But I think the part of the travel bug that I appreciated the most was getting to know the unique cultures and neighborhoods where we traveled, and being able to bring that to the forefront in the destinations that I've worked with. Thinking part of our development for Explore Brookhaven was recognizing that the community had defined neighborhoods for live, work, and play purposes, and using that as part of our shared experience with our travelers, treating our guests to that experience, whether they are a guest for a day or forever, is part of our mantra. So, and on a personal note, I mean, those experiences, I think, are celebrated within our own communities. I alluded to the fact that my mother's family immigrated from Lebanon. And so for family meals, that is what we are centered around, is the dishes that we grew up with our grandmother cooking, our great grandmother making, making sure that we share that with our next generations. Have done that for my husband's side of the family as well. I just think that is part of what we offer to each other, to have a unique perspective in the world. And so I've tried to carry that through into the work that I'm doing now in Explore Brookhaven. That all came naturally, which was a very unique experience, like to Courtney's point, that the community was already open to and welcoming to that concept. Even to the point of venturing into Explore Brookhaven rather than visit, we found that a lot of people knew where Brookhaven was, where we were located, but they didn't necessarily know what the different neighborhoods were, whether they lived here or they were visiting here. So it just all helped us position Brookhaven as a place to get out and explore. And so, did I answer your questions?
Yes, you did,
Okay,
Renee.
Good.
Thank you. Karen?
So why is DEI important to me and our organization? Well, DEI is part of my heritage. I'm a first generation immigrant into the United States, very proud of both of my home country and the United States. For our organization, unlike Courtney, I did not know that I was stepping into promoting DEI in my organization when I took the position. It was something that we intentionally took that turn and dove into it. And Megan said something that I want to come back to. She said that it snowballs. And once you open up the conversation, I was surprised how many people were so supportive of it. Once we brought this to our board and we said, in order for us to promote the region as an area where to come visit Harriet Tubman, we need to be intentional in how we're doing it. And we need to carry the DEI message and live it within our organization and promote all of our partners to live it as well. And they were very receptive. I said, yes, thank you. This is something we need to address. We're glad we have somebody at the helm who's important to them in a personal level. And wants to bring it into our organization. So we've had very little resistance so far. You know, there's always a couple of voices around that have questions about how it's moving, but we took this intentional step in this direction and we're moving forward boldly.
Thank you for sharing that, Karen. That's really inspiring to hear that you all intentionally are doing this work. And then Melissa.
Yes, ma'am. You know, it's really simple for me. I'm personally, DEI is important because one, of access to opportunity and ultimately voice. And through my own experience and through my lived experience, you know, those are two things that haven't necessarily been afforded to me. But I have to admit, I have been fortunate to have opportunities that provide choices, but that's not always the case to others. So for me, my commitment is really about, you know, where I'm at in my career and being able to leverage that to continue that work with like minds, to continue to kind of rebuild and create these pathways so that there are opportunities for others, especially looking at our young leaders to really come into this industry and ultimately take our leads and continue this work to be innovative. But in order to do that, we all have to bring them with us and provide them the environments where we can be inclusive and have them be able to have the opportunities to bring their genius, their thoughts, their voice to the table. And that goes the same with also in terms of the communities that we serve from a tourism perspective. I'll mention this a couple times, probably throughout the course of this session. But ultimately, again, that opportunity is not available. Those doors are sometimes invisible. And as you know, the seats that we sit in the tourism space, we often have the opportunity to open those doors for other people. And we have to be personally accountable to do that. And so my commitment is to be personally accountable for that, to allow for there to be that opportunity and for people to be able to have a seat at the table and bring their voice to so it can be heard. From a Miles perspective, as an organization, you know, we're committed to DEI, really to implement change within Miles so that we can better serve you know, our clients in terms of being a tourism marketing you know, agency and looking at equitable and inclusive marketing practices so we can better advise clients and really ultimately the community they serve and the visitors that come to visit. You know, we know that, you know, tourism organizations have really the authority in that space to drive economic change and opportunities within the community. And so we want to be very intentional and believe that developing strategic approach to DEI within a destination will help foster that change and that innovation. And so we want to be part of that conversation. We want to be able to help lead that. And I'm very excited to dig into that work and the opportunity to be able to touch organizations and destinations directly to help achieve that. So thanks, Portia.
Yes, thank you, Melissa. And you know, you are correct. Accountability. We all have to be accountable. Well, thank you, ladies, for sharing that. Now we're going to jump into, these are individual questions for each of you. This first one will be for Courtney. In August 2017, white supremacists rallied in Charlottesville and sparked a national conversation. How does a community work to address its reputation in the national news while making real change for its residents and visitors?
Thanks, Portia. That's basically the question I asked myself when I was trying to figure out whether or not I should take the job. Am I the right person for the job? Should I be, how do I even tackle that question? And what I realized when I got to Charlottesville was that our community was still having that conversation. We were 2 years past the rally, and I asked myself, why is this still on everyone's mind? And Larry, I'll give a shout out from SATW who's on this call. It lives in Charlottesville as well, so I know that he understands this local conversation as well, if not better than I do. So what I ended up doing was I spent a year talking to different local Black residents and just said, you know, what do I not understand about what happened? Because I know that I am not getting the full picture. And, you know, a lot of people were reluctant to have that conversation with me initially, understandably. Our organization didn't have a good reputation locally outside with local Black residents. Was told that, you know, we had in the past dismissed stories that had been put in front of us. We hadn't been inclusive of different businesses and opportunities. And so, you know, I spent a year just trying to get as many conversations happening as possible. And every time somebody agreed to meet with me, I would ask them, who's the next person I can meet with? Can you introduce me to someone else? So after about a year of that, in August of 2020, I met with somebody who helped me put the pieces together, and he and I brought about 30 different tourism representatives together who were all local, who were all African-American. And so we could have a conversation with me being the only white face in the room, and I said, what can we do here differently than we've done in the past? And so we spent about 9 months meeting as a group and figured out how we wanted to move forward, and created a sub-brand for our organization called Discover Black Seaville. We hired local Black marketing experts to run our social media channels that we've created, and really given back directly to that effort so that it's authentic. I know authenticity came up earlier in our conversation, and that really is where we need to be. And for us too, for our organization, sorry, I'll pause here to say, you know, that putting out a counter narrative to what people see in the national news is how we are trying to address the fact that we continue to come up every time that there is a hate rally or, you know, the insurrection at the Capitol. Charlottesville is often pointed to as the place where it all started. And so we need to continue to have a counter narrative to that, but that comes from a really authentic place. And our team has done a lot internally. We all participated in a 9-month training called What About Race, so that we could get a really in-depth understanding of the racial issues that are here locally, but also nationally. And we have been purposefully reaching out to different vendors, and we've hired a couple of experts. I think Sophia Hyder-Hawk is on this call, and I know she's a board member for Travel Unity. She is one of our consultants who helps us with this work and helps us identify what we're doing well and what we need to improve upon. And we are putting a focus on DEI throughout everything we do. We put out an RFP. We send it to Miles Media. It's going to have language inside of it that says we want to work with people who understand that this is an essential part of our mission. So that we're very clear from the onset. We have a DEI question for everyone we interview, and so it's really at this point baked into most everything that we do.
It's very interesting. That's a fine line with that entire situation, and the fact that, you know, you understood that you need to step back and talk to people and listen, which a lot of folks still don't do. So thank you for that. There is, I will come back there. There is a question, but I'll make sure we grab that question. Renee, this one is for you. How did Brookhaven build DEI into their strategy?
You know, it was pretty organic, which was really interesting to me. When I came on board, the city of Brookhaven was only about 2 or 3 years old when they created the destination organization, and 5 years old, sorry, but still very young, right? And so we had a lot of opinions about what should be said or what could be said or what should be done, but because there had been no specific strategy on building the Brookhaven brand. We were literally able to start from scratch. What we knew is that there was an international corridor coming through Brookhaven that went from Atlanta to Beaufort, Georgia, called Beaufort Highway. And it is the more international retail, restaurant, more affordable real estate area like most communities have. In Baton Rouge, that would be Florida Boulevard with all the unique, right? I mean, we all have something. However, the section in Brookhaven is pretty small, and it is not as robust as some of the areas in Chamblee and Doraville moving up through the perimeter. But we just made a real effort to sit down and talk to the owners of the restaurants and the shops and make sure that we understand their stories and we get that out. And it was really important for me to have staff that culturally could relate to that and speak Spanish, and making sure that, you know, I can get myself in trouble in Spanish. I can do okay in French, but I know better than trust my Spanish. So, you know, just making sure that we had staff members that understood and appreciated those values as well, and making sure that our approach did not create a fear of indemnification of the area, that the city is very sensitive to that. So we are more involved in city leadership decisions than I've ever been in other destinations, but it's because we're 12 square miles and our communities are, I mean, if our guests are residents, those residents are also voters. And so our messaging is really important that we feel that it be very consistent. The city just went through a social justice, race and equity commission, led that through. And one of the committees is on creating a vision and mission statement. And they asked for me to present to them the process in which Explore Brookhaven went through building their vision, mission, and brand promise, and how that is relevant to the city of Brookhaven as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that's integrated, since we were able to do that before the city of Brookhaven was really able to research that too. So I just feel like it's a true partnership in recognizing the needs of the community, even who we promote and how we promote them. So did I meet that question?
No, that was fine. You did bring up a good point, Renee, about, you know, taking a look at your staff. We've been having this conversation across the board with DMOs, CVBs. You know, how can you tackle any of this if your staff looks one way?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a huge deal. And so we need to think about that. We need to look at that.
Well, and concentrating on our board representation is very important too.
Yes.
Requiring that our board members either work or live in Brookhaven does create some limiting factors, because we are part of a metro area. And so thinking about how to expand that reach is really important. We do have a, you know, higher education university, four-year university in Brookhaven. That helps as well in terms of resources. And, you know, tapping into Children's Hospital of Atlanta, which is based in Brookhaven, Emory Hospital, which has a new facility, you know, making sure that those bigger picture thinkers are part of our board and our vision.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Renee. Karen, did I just see your cat run across the, I thought I saw that.
You most definitely did, Portia. Common
Okay, I
occurrence.
just wanted to check. Tell us how Cayuga County is changing the way it's presenting itself to embrace its identity as a place where Harriet Tubman chose to live her life.
Thank you, Portia. I guess I want to remind myself that I am in the DEI in Action panel, and I really appreciate that I'm in this panel because that's a lot of what we're doing. Like I mentioned earlier, we jumped into this intentionally, and we're trying to ensure that everything we do speaks with that intention. When we started this refocusing, it's not a marketing campaign, it's not short-lived, it's not just because next year is our bicentennial 200th birthday of Harriet Tubman, but it is because it's something that is something that our town owns and that's important to us. So what we recognized from the very beginning is that this needs to be looked at wholeheartedly, not just in the invitation as a destination marketing agency, but also in the welcome. When we do outreach to this diverse audience to our area, how will they be welcomed? So like Courtney stated, we hit the ground running. We created a committee of voices of the town, so to say. So voices that were engaged with different organizations that spoke for DEI in our area. So through them, we're able to get a broader audience and understand the impact both of tourism and of reaching out a diverse audience through this messaging. We have utilized the Travel Unity's certified diversity tourism professional, not only to enforce our staff, but to invite our partners to get certified as well, to ensure that this messaging is woven into the organizations that represent the tourism product in our county. We engaged with a public relations agency to get out the message, but it was part of the RFP really to ensure that there was a Black woman voice in the PR agency, because we are speaking of Harriet Tubman. So we wanted to ensure that the message was honest and concise throughout. A lot of the messaging goes through the committee, who represent also a lot of Harriet Tubman's legacy, including family members of Harriet Tubman, to make sure that we honor her memory. We try to ensure that the community is included. Therefore, our voice to the incoming public, incoming visitors, everything is woven through it. It took us a while to get things rolling, but we're very proud we did, because I'm sure we did it right. We incorporated the right voices to hear everything through. We're also working on a series of conversations in the community where we are inviting residents, businesses, and elected officials to discuss the subject of what a diverse visitation represents to our community. And we want as many voices engaged in having that conversation for various reasons, partly to identify any pitfalls or issues that might arise and be able to address them ahead of time, and to be able to speak to the importance of diversity and honestly, the financial benefit of being open to lots of different audiences that come in. So this allowed us to enter the platform to create the actions to move in this direction. It does not, we've been very focused on the Black traveler because that is the content that we have available. We are very research-based. We've bought the research from MMGY for the Black traveler that they did, and that's been a wonderful resource for us, both in conversation for our destination and our marketing. But it's also allowed us to incorporate a lot more the diversity, equity, and inclusivity concepts within our website, within our partners. So we address accessibility, and we address accessibility in general to with their messaging. So it's not only our marketing and our outreach, but we're educating our partners to continue that same thread. That kind of covers a lot of the things that we have actionably done. But I also want to speak to the receptiveness of this. As I mentioned earlier, it has been very well received. Our board is 100% supportive of the direction that we're doing as we engage. And I think Courtney mentioned that as well, any outside agencies to work with us. We have the conversation up front. It's like, this is important to us, this direction we're going, and we want to basically see what are you doing in your organization so that we try to include and spread the message as much as possible.
Thank you, Karen. A couple of points that stood out to me, it's really important that we understand you have to, doing all of this work is very meaningful, but you have to take your time. If you rush it, it's going to be done incorrectly and everybody's going to know it. That's number one. And you have to do it together. So pulling in stakeholders, pulling in the community makes it much, much stronger than just this one-off person trying to go and do something. So I do appreciate that. And then the next question is for Melissa. Melissa, where do you see the travel industry right now? And where do you see the travel industry going in the future as it relates to DEI?
Yeah, so I mean, really staying in true to DEI in action this morning for our conversation. It's interesting. We've all somehow endured 2020. We've stayed focused and diligent in 21, and like we're already in 2022, right? There was a lot of activity a year and a half ago to kind of pause, to internally reflect as individual organizations, as industry collectively as a whole, to kind of really respond to the inequities and the lack of inclusion that had really always been there. So, we started in a place that we knew that was very familiar. We just weren't paying attention until that moment of crisis happened where we all had to stop and look. So for the point of conversation today and for this question, I want to kind of really focus on 3 topics that I think are critically important. One being workforce development, 2, moving from statements and mission statements to actual actions and plans. And then 3, really at the end of the day, as destination organizations, we're stewards for our brand on behalf of the destination. And what does that mean in terms of inclusivity and equity? So, looking at workforce development, I think it's interesting. Weber Shandwick did a study of diversity professionals, and this is beyond our industry, that they asked what were their top 3 priorities in the next 12 to 18 months. And those top 3 priorities was recruiting and retaining diverse talent, diversity and inclusion training, and then fostering a diverse and inclusive workplace. So I just want to note that that study was done in 2019, and now we are 18 months past that. And these are still the same priorities as professionals, and not just diversity professionals, but just professionals, all of you all on this call that are leaders, that are leading organizations, departments, whatever it may be, are still really critically important. And, thank you, COVID. That definitely didn't do our industry any favors. We already had a competitive environment when it came to retaining and recruiting talent. We are in a far more competitive now environment of doing that same work. And so it's really important that we broaden our work and our talent beyond the same kind of places and the same faces that we've been hiring and kind of looking for. We have to move to other pathways. We have to create other bridges in order to kind of develop those paths for recruitment of diverse talent. And when I say diverse talent, I want to be really clear. We're not just always focused on race. There's a lot of other identifiers when it comes to talking about diversity that ultimately brings in a bigger conversation around diversity of thought. And that is what's going to be important as we look to building that staff and that team moving forward. In 2020, Destinations International did its first kind of benchmark study of looking at demographics and actual EDI perceptions within destination organizations. And one of the things that study actually revealed, specifically amongst entry and mid-level employees, which tended to be the younger staff, of course, within organizations, was that there was a desire and a need to have an opportunity for training and education at that level that would actually impact in a long-term way, the practices in terms of being deliberate when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion. In addition to that, they also really wanted to have a place and a voice to foster conversation and inclusion, to be open and to be part of having a sense of community within the organizations. And so there's work to be done to kind of what does that look like? And, we spend a lot of time, I think, in kind of the sales and marketing roles of our jobs, but we have to look internally in terms of what that work culture is and what that environment in which we need to conduct and do and succeed in our business practices. So in looking into kind of moving from statements to action, many organizations, I think, made deliberate efforts to establish, DEI mission statements, and really kind of stand on where they saw they needed to go, and congratulate all that have done that. But now, being more than a year later, I think it's really important to transition those statements to actually action. I know Greg talked about this. A lot of folks have already talked about this on the call this morning, but we need to really proactively prevent fatigue and avoid complacency in this conversation. And, that's kind of the culture that we're in right now. What's happening, what's the crisis we're focused on, and then we turn to the next thing. This needs to be a continued focus because it's a continued crisis. And I think of an importance that though there may not be something that's in our phase about the conversation, we need to make sure that, continuing our education to understand what these topics are about, to continue to grow our knowledge. It's the reality. We don't know what we don't know. And having the conversation and understanding that the DEI space is going to continue to evolve. The intersectionality across different identities, lived experiences, all of those things are going to continue to be exposed and be able to share that as we work collectively as an industry. And so, really continuing the education, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and then really looking at the fact that there's going to be an impact on the changing demographics. And that really leads me into, the third topic in terms of, being brand stewards for your destination. I feel that, as a professional and in my career, that it's really the responsibility of destination organizations to be brand stewards on behalf of their community. And what does that mean? That means really actively, we must be deliberate, and we have to approach diversity, equity, and inclusion that will really bring together a variety of voices and experiences. And we have to really think actively about, how we evolve our marketing practices to be equitable and inclusive. So, again, this has already been touched on already on our conversations, but, what are those practices that promote community partnerships and contributions and authentic experiences? I mean, those are things that are going to help destinations differentiate themselves and ultimately compete, for that visitor that everybody wants. But this is not just about marketing representation, thinking about equity. We all have a role to play in terms of how tourism develops in our communities and how people have access to that. And I've touched on that already a couple of times, but, having that equitable access as we see people in destinations, you have grants that are out there in terms of tourism development to kind of reinvest in the communities. How deliberate we need to be is really important of how those dollars are going to help communities that have not been in that conversation, that don't necessarily have access to that capital. But a lot of us have roles within our communities that are able to actually drive that conversation and have that influence. So, there's a lot I think I could probably touch on. Those were the three things this morning that I wanted to focus on. But, again, that door to access in terms of tourism is not always open to all. So I just want to encourage everyone, in thinking about workforce development, thinking about bringing action plans to reality, and then really ultimately driving and owning, who you are as a destination and representing the diversity that community it holds is really important.
Thank you very much, Melissa. All of that, girl, we could talk about that for the next couple of days, but it's very, very important. You made a lot of great points, and I feel the same way. We're where we are now, we've had the uncomfortable, as everybody, uncomfortable conversations that now should have shifted now to comfortable conversations, right? So once we're there, which we already should be there at this point. So what are we doing? I'm already at action, and I'm already at action because I've been talking about this all my life. I started in tourism in 1990. So it's like this, that's great that folks and everybody's starting to wake up. I've been talking about this every day. So I'm past the action, and I'm like, okay, let's do what we need to do. Speaking of, and I see someone already put it in the chat, and I was going to bring this up. And no, Ronnie did not tell me to mention this, but I did see it in the chat. The Travel Unity, the CDTP program that they have, which is the Certified Diversity Travel Professional Program, especially if you have not begun any of this. And a lot of places have not. It's okay. It's never too late to start, but you need to start. Okay. So it is really a good program. I actually went through it myself. Renee just finished. She has hers actually next to her name, CDTP. Thank you, Renee. So that is up. But why that is so important, because like Ronnie said, it is a roadmap. You look at all this and you say, well, where do I start? What do I do? Who do I talk to? It is the outline. It is there for you. The beauty of this program as well is the fact that when you leave, and that's what we talk about. Yeah, it's great to talk about this right now, but when you leave an organization, what happens? Sometimes, not all the time. It dies out, it disappears. So there's something you need to leave once you've gone, something behind. This is a roadmap. It's very detailed. It's about 6 sessions. At the end of this, you would have created a beautiful DEI plan. It is something to get you started, something you can do checks and balances with. If you have not looked into it, it's already been put in the chat. Just take a look at it and think about it. But I went through it. It was really, really, really helpful for me. Have we?
Portia, can I comment on that for a second?
Sure.
One of the things that you said,
Absolutely.
I think is important to weed out in that action plan is that part of that plan, I think it's critically important that this work is actually operationalized within the organization. So I think initiatives and programs, I think they're great because you see immediate results, but the long term is going to be how it's integrated into how you function as an organization, how you craft job descriptions, how you structure your business and operating plans on an annual basis. So, and I say that because, often you have individuals like myself leading these charges within organizations, but individuals like myself don't stay forever in organizations. So you need to make sure that once, that path is developed, that it can continue regardless of who's actually, within that team structure, that it's actually the responsibility of everyone that's on staff.
Very important point, Melissa. Especially if you have anything or you can assist with helping with policies, changing of policies and procedures. When you're looking at your hiring panels, what does that hiring panel look like? Have you actively, and when we talk about this is not always Black women, we're talking about age, we're talking about women. What does that hiring panel look like? If you only have one perspective, right, on that hiring panel, it doesn't work. You're going to get one thing. You've got to have different perspectives. So take a look at your hiring panel. So a lot of that is covered as well, but you have to then take that and turn it into action. So have
Portia,
we been?
Can I add just to the comments right here real quick?
Oh, absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
just to share, part of your thesis, if you will, your plan that you put together at the end of the CDTP is that you have to have what has been done, what you're doing now, and what your aspirations are. And part of that is the crafting of the job descriptions and the search processes and how you make sure that you continually evaluate the representation of your team and your board in your community, as well as, the imagery and all of that. So directly to Melissa's point, that is definitely an action item that is part of the mindset of this process. Yep.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Renee. Does anybody, I'm looking over at the chat, does anybody have any questions that we need to address or anything anybody wants to respond or talk about? Anything?
I just want to quickly to the question in the chat. Overall, the CDTP program, it's a leadership program that's for visitor-facing organizations. As we move forward, working with SATW and other folks, we are going to be launching / building up our media network and other resources. I would just say, look at the program. It really is around the 3 pillars of our DEI standards, which is management and workforce, visitorship, and community impact. So effectively, that's the where we're going on that end. Yeah, so we're happy to talk to folks about how to whether it's a good fit or not within that. There was something I wanted to ask the whole panel, but it came up I think within Courtney's comments, and I know this is digging deeper into kind of the DEI component of things, and I'd love Courtney to kind of start, but to hear from others too. But around that line of asking people versus doing your own research, because I imagine your first step, Courtney, was not just going out and saying, "Hi, Black community in Charlottesville, tell me everything I don't know." So I just would love to hear more when it comes to thoughts around doing your own research versus needing to hear from others when it comes to understanding these issues.
Yeah, that's definitely the abridged story. So I was trying to keep it short on time. But a lot of the conversation is happening during our city council meetings. They're open, they're public. We have a really strong mayor who has been showing a lot of what she has seen in the past 4 years that she has been on council. And so, you know, having an understanding of where she was coming from just by watching those city council meetings was really eye-opening. You know, doing a lot of reading into what was happening. Yeah, I mean, there was the ask definitely changed over time of, hey, I'm new to town. It's nice to meet you. How can we work together? To, you know, I'm not getting X, Y, and Z of the story, and, you know, what part of the narrative am I missing? So yeah, I mean, not relying on everyone else to educate me and doing a lot of that education myself is a really important point. And that was what that 9-month training that we took really helped me understand where a lot of my blind spots were. I'm sure I still have them, but, you know, helped narrow those down so that I was able to enter a conversation and not sound like an idiot. So that I could be a lot more educated when I was going into those conversations.
Can I add to that? I just want to say to Ronnie's question and to your point, Courtney, I mean, I just kind of want to remind everyone that even having anecdotal conversations is research. I mean, if you take the time and you process those conversations, you're going to begin to see, I think, consistent threads of what is out there. And that helps, I think, inform your own research or your own kind of self-knowledge or discovery later. So I would take every conversation, and I do take every conversation to heart in terms of, you know, what people are feeling, what they're seeing, what they need, because that's what, you know, our roles are, is really about addressing needs in the community, addressing how we can adapt to that change, whatever that may be. But I think those anecdotal conversations are priceless. You're not going to find that data on paper or in a survey. So I just kind of wanted to soapbox that little point real quick.
And what I want to add to that is, just personally for me, you know, it's kind of a mixed bag. You know, you'll hear some African Americans that will say, you know, don't come to me, I'm not the encyclopedia. Don't ask me any questions about how I feel. You know how I feel. My friends say that, okay? But where I'm concerned is, I don't necessarily feel that way to a certain degree. No, I do not have all the answers, but I'm very open to a conversation, because that's what this is about. It's about dialogue. It's about communication. It's about understanding. It's about wanting to learn and know. So for me, all the time, I have the conversations all the time. And you're right, they are very valuable conversations. And that's how I feel about that. That's how I feel about that.
I'd like to jump in on this question as well, because it has been central to everything we've done. We are a very data-based organization, so we have acquired a lot of research in the direction that we're going, but also opened up a lot of conversations. Aside from the World Cafes that we're hosting around the community, that we're hoping to have about 5 of them in the conversation about, you know, a diverse visitation to our region. We've also held focus groups, both with travelers and tour operators, on the subject and the way we're approaching it. And, you know, what are our pitfalls? Where are we missing the messaging? And we have continuous conversations with our stakeholders within our own community and our tourism partners as well. And as Melissa said, each conversation is a little bit of added research, is a little bit of added content that we have. I often say that, you know, obviously no one of us has all the answers or is really a full expert on it. But if we surround ourselves with the right voices and provide a platform to elevate those voices, we can get a little closer to getting the right answer.
Absolutely. And let me say one thing to that too, Karen. You know, for everyone, it's included, you know, with me too, we're learning as we go. Don't be afraid to make a mistake. Like, nobody's perfect. You need to learn from the mistake, but there will be mistakes made all the time. I make mistakes all the time. I accidentally say something, or I shouldn't have written this, or whatever it may be, but that's how you grow. So I'm just throwing that out there, because there's a fear there. Well, if I do this, you know, everything shuts down. Well, I mean, the only way to grow, that's what we all have to do together. Anybody else?
We have a
Ron,
question.
you have any
about-
last comments?
Well, we have a question actually that was sent to me directly, which is any advice from the panelists for individuals and organizations to not become exhausted when pursuing DEI policies and initiatives? So that fatigue of, I think on both ends, one, doing this work, but also when you are working with folks who might not be seeing why this is important, how do you keep pushing on with this?
Who wants to take that first?
I was just going to say, I think that's a question of our time right now with COVID too, right? Like, so many of us are fatigued. And so, you know, as the leader of my organization, I have stressed to my team to take time off and take mental health breaks and, you know, to try and take care of yourself. Because if you haven't taken care of yourself, you're not going to be able to help other people. That's a really simplistic approach. But at least, you know, if you're able to pause and know that you're in this for the long run, I think that can help with the pacing of things.
Renee, were you going to go ahead?
You can go before me. Go ahead.
No, I'll keep mine short. I think this work is overwhelming. I mean, I find myself in the afternoon sometime being like, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to save the world. And that's just the reality. So, you know, I have to laugh, sorry. But the point here is that you have to sit back and prioritize. You have to really be focused on what the big idea. You also have to be focused on what you can actually accomplish. You know, I think in this conversation there, you know, solving systemic racism and housing discrepancies. I mean, there's just so many big topics, but what can you actually imprint on and actually move and have impact? You know, there's a series of questions that I think will help people boil down to what they can focus on, what they can actually accomplish and actually have change and impact on. And so I think prioritization is really important. And also, you know, that it has to be a dedicated space. You know, I've heard, I can't remember who earlier, but I know Greg talked about this, but the investment in this work in terms of dollars is important. And those dollars, having those resources, I think alleviates some of that fatigue. It helps you get the resources that you need because you can put that money forward to actually advance things a lot faster than trying to do things on your own and spending time to, you know, cat herd, so to speak, sometimes, and being distracted. So, you know, again, prioritization, I think, is a big key in helping subside some of that fatigue.
And, you know, and I think, you know, Melissa touched on the whole, it's one thing to have a vision, a mission, you know, a brand promise or a strategic plan. It's one thing to act on that. And so we present to our board every action that's been taken since the last board meeting to address those goals and objectives in the strategic plan. And diversity, equity, and inclusion is one of those goals and objectives. So if we help the city coordinate civic dinners, I feel like, okay, great, I've done something towards the big picture, right? But we also try to stay in our lane because, well, if we start getting into the housing conversation, unless it's about taking over hotels that are currently actively hotels, that's a different conversation. You know, just allowing those that do their jobs, if they ask for an opinion, great. But, you know, being a destination management organization is really about the perception of your destination, not just the marketing of it. And so having a seat at the table is really important, but sometimes you don't have to be the one to take the action.
I'll jump in after Renee because that is very similar to what I was thinking. Sorry, my brain just totally blocked. I think I'm just going to stop talking. I don't know. I'm sorry. I had one of those.
That's a perfect example of what they're asking about.
I know. Actually, okay. So the thoughts back. The thoughts back. When we started, one of the things that we took action on, and it was advised by several other people, is like Renee said, we're going to stay in our lane. We are a tourism organization. We're not flying the social justice flag, but we are taking actions and things that will impact. So that's part of the committee that we formed, were those community members that were involved and other organizations where they can take action. So it was being aware of what was happening in the community, so we stay in touch with the pulse of the issues, but is engaging with organizations that can take the action. Megan also wrote on the sideline is spread the work. You know, you need to have other people involved who can pick up the slack. So I am very proud to be in an organization where I am very well supported by my marketing manager, Claire Dunlap, who assumes a lot of these responsibilities, and we're both passionate in it. And we have the voice and support of the committee, who is picking up some of the harder issues and having those conversations that don't really pertain to tourism, but would impact the visitor and the resident at the same time. So it is spreading the work, so you don't have to have those little bumps in your head that kind of make you go mute for a second, but we're going to get there.
I'm going to say the same thing just right quick, Ronnie. It's about spreading it around. No one person, you can't do everything. It's like anything else, though, any other subject matter that's on the table. I mean, it needs to be spread out, but you know, it's work. No denying it's work. It is. So.
Thank you, Portia, and thank you to all of our panelists. I'm just going to wrap up quickly with just letting folks know as we move forward, our Travel Unity Alliance is really going to keep growing. We already have a good assortment of folks that we're working with. And this really, when we're talking about resources, is something that we're looking to prioritize. A lot of times people wonder, you know, where does the money go that when you're paying for things, and what's the benefit for being part of a group. And really what we're going to be doing is the money that's coming in is going to be creating resources for the groups, the organizations that are a part of this, as well as the program we have on the individual side to introduce people from underrepresented backgrounds to the world of travel and travel careers. So general sorts of benefits. And one thing, here's an announcement. We are going to be launching a job marketplace. So there are certainly other places that are putting up jobs and postings of that nature. And our hope is to be working with them and collaborating to make this be something where folks who are looking for those candidates, because that is a big question on the employer side, is how do I find those diverse candidates? But what's important to us also is for the candidates themselves, how are they going to know that an organization is not just doing this performatively, but rather that there is that commitment? So that's something that's going to be coming up soon. Just quickly, I know some folks don't know about our individual pledge. We've talked about our association pledge. So this is another resource. And as people are starting this journey of DEI, we find this to be a good way to introduce some of those broader and initial concepts. So with that, Renee is teasing something that she's going to announce tomorrow. But as she's here now, she said in the chat, I'm not going to say it, but if you saw it, there's your tease. That's what's coming up. And thank you for coming to this session.